Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Scumdog's Kennel. I'm your host, Chris Williams, and in today's episode, we're going to be looking at some we're going to be looking at some terrifying tales of Sasquatch and Wendigo, folks. I have some stories detailing, well, detail, yeah, terrifying tales of Sasquatch and Wendigo, folks. Either way, I have a great live stream planned for us, and we're going to have some fun. Sorry about the delay, folks. I'm off my usual routine for a little bit, but I'll get back to it soon enough. Hopefully, I can upload my videos today, okay? Yeah, indeed. Hopefully, I can upload my videos. Either way, let me basically make sure I can do the stream without basically destroying everything, like the camera in front of us. Either way, let's go to share screen, folks, and let's go look at some, Indiegogos and Kickstarters real quick. Now, here we have the Chinoo. It's, Chinoo 77, 64 blood-soaked pages written and illustrated by Graham Nolan. Mature audiences, violence, gore, language. New pages completed. Let's jump into the synopsis. Now, he's back, folks. It's 1977. The storm of the century is paralyzing Buffalo, New York, when truck driver Hank Donovan comes across a scene of unimaginable horror. A car stuck in the snow, its occupants shredded to pieces. The only survivor, a newborn baby. Driven by a desperate need for redemption, he vows to protect the infant at any cost. But the snow hides a predator far worse than the storm. The Chinoo, a ravenous creature stalking the blood-soaked drifts, hungry for its next kill. Can Hank outrun his demons and the monster before it claims them both? Well, back to the Chinoo 77 and find out. You can back it for $25 to get any individual cover, folks. Like basically cover A here, folks, which has Hank Donovan and the infant trudging through the snow while the Chinoo stalks them from behind. Cover B is more or less the same thing, folks, except it's been done, as you see. The cover has been done up in 1970s, Marvel comic style, with a few word bubbles as well. There's also the Comics King sketch cover variant, available for 24 hours, folks, but I think it's basically far past that time. It looks pretty good. You also have cover D, which is exclusive and only in the Ultimate Collector's box. Now, as I said, folks, in back basically covers A and B to get, individually for $25. You can also back basically the Ultimate Collector's box, folks, for, $250. So go think about checking out the Chinoo 77 up on Indiegogo, folks. By the way, we have 26 people watching. Either way, let's go over here, folks, and look at Atheos, a new NES game for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Let's jump right into the synopsis. Explore, upgrade, survive. Humanity's last hope lies beyond the stars. After decades of war, Earth is a toxic wasteland. The distant world Atheos, 10 light years away, may be humanity's salvation, but only an artificial explorer can survive the journey. You play as Kira, an autonomous synthetic AI aboard the mothership Elysium. Years of orbital study are cut short when a massive energy surge cripples the ship. With damaged thrusters and failing communication systems, you must descend to Atheos, where survival becomes your only mission. Beneath the plant's crust stirs Zyrek, a colossal war construct of the Nazari. Detecting your arrival, he scares unstable energy cores to sabotage Elysium and stop humanity's foothold. Carol would not retreat. She must destroy the cores, restore Elysium, and confront Zyrek. Humanity's future depends on stopping the Machine Titan before Atheos is lost. Here are some cutscenes, folks, from the game itself. They look, as you can see, basically they look pretty good. Either way, this game relies on its gameplay, folks, because Atheos is a world of ancient technologies, forgotten ruins, and volatile energy. As you explore its sprawling regions, you'll discover powerful upgrades that will shape how you fight, traverse, and, survive. Because you play as Kira, a synthetic artificial intelligence, and she relies on an internal energy system, folks. But even at zero energy, Kira can still run, jump, and fire a standard plasma weapon, so the game always feels fair. But with upgrades and, careful energy management, you'll receive powerful abilities throughout the game, folks. And if you play it right, you'll be able to traverse this game and have tremendous fun doing as you do. Either way, you get powers like the boot thrusters, which will gain you full mobility, which will allow you to zip across hazardous terrain, as well as the cryo cannon, freeze enemies and convert them into temporary platforms or stop them in their tracks or stop them in their tracks to inflict maximum damage. You can see a gameplay demonstration of those abilities right here, folks. You use the cryocan to freeze the enemies, and then use the boot thrusters to fly over to them, getting across this, canyon full of spikes. You will also have the plasma blaster, fire rapid energy bolts to fend off hostile life forms, your standard plasma gun, folks, but it also receives an upgrade in the game. You'll gain the charged mega shot, consume energy to release a devastating charged blast. Not bad. You also have the phase shift and the nail shield and other abilities you'll gain throughout the game too, folks. Either way, not bad. Go check out Atheos up on Indiegogo. You can back it for $12 to get the game ROM downloaded to your computer, or $40 to get the game cartridge. But I recommend the $60 perks, folks, and the $99 perks. The $60 perk and the $99 perk will get you basically the game cartridge, a game box, and a physical manual to basically download to your computer. A physical manual instead of the digital one where you will get in both the $12 ROM and basically game ROM downloaded to your computer, or the $40 perk, which will basically also include the downloaded manual. You'll also receive other swag as well in this game, folks. So think about checking out Atheos up on up on Kickstarter. Either way, let's get out of this and get to our article here, folks. Here we have this, folks. So let me do this so you can all see my pretty face as I basically read it to you, folks. Let me do this as well. Maybe get it like that. So there. Also, let me try that with the lights here, folks. Either way, we'll be reading this article. It looks pretty good. Maybe I'll just here. Yeah, that's about right. Either way, as you can see, it looks like a great article, folks. So let's get into it. Terrifying tales of kidnappings, man killers, and cannibals in North America's wilderness. So could these attacks by these cannibalistic monsters be partially responsible for some of the missing 411 cases that we've talked about before, folks, where people seemingly go missing in state parks? Maybe. Either way, folks, it looks good. By the way, we also have 26 people watching. And once again, thank you all for tuning in into my stream and I hope you enjoy it. Let's get into this stream now. For centuries, stories from the remote forests of the United States and Canada have described humanoid beings that abduct people, attack hunters, and occasionally kill those who enter their territory. Some accounts resemble the modern Sasquatch, while others involve the Wendigo, a supernatural figure associated with starvation, cannibalism, and the dangers of the northern wilderness. Are these merely cautionary legends, or do some preserve memories of genuine encounters with something unknown? Indeed, folks, for centuries, people have been basically reporting these creatures. Some of these stories go back to to old Native American legends and tales told around campfires by tribesmen for, centuries. But nonetheless, they have been talked about, and people have been seeing these entities, ever since man first stepped onto the North American continent. Some of them could be real, because I do believe Bigfoot is real, folks. Wendigo, we can also talk about that, folks. Pardon me, by the way, folks. I also have a soda if you have a drink with you or basically a snack, folks. Eat it and drink right now. Either way, let's continue. Let's read the case file. It details some more information for this story, or should I say stories, because there's more than one to read through. Either way, various dates, primarily the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Times, various, frequently dusk, various. These apparent cases where people basically saw these entities frequently happen at, dusk or nighttime. Location: British Columbia, the Northern Rocky Mountains, the Great Lakes region, northern Minnesota, Ontario, and the Pacific Northwest, which has basically been the common areas where people have encountered these entities, both Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever you want to call them, as well as the Wendigo, who might be an entirely different entity. And I'll discuss that after a little more about what it might be in relation to Bigfoot, folks. Setting: remote forests, mountain valleys, trapping camps, indigenous communities, and isolated wilderness. As I said, these places, like basically Native American, communities, folks, as well as basically, settler, residences, have basically encountered these entities, as I said. I just want to re I want to basically reiterate that one more time. Now, witnesses, hunters, trappers, prospectors, indigenous witnesses, and wilderness travelers. I don't think I have to say more about that. Reported by historical newspapers, indeed. They used to call these incidents with these creatures, folks, wild men encounters. Basically, it kind of confused people who read them, folks. It was like basically back in the 19th century, folks, it was basically a well-known fact that some people basically left civilization and decided to live out in the woods and stuff like that. And these were known as wild men. But if you look at the accounts and some of the things that were basically reported, folks, it doesn't sound like they were talking about basically some guy who basically was wearing furs or just let his hair grow out. It sounds like these stories involve basically these almost ape-like or basically very hairy inhuman creatures. But they were all reported under the pseudonym wild men, wild men and stuff like that. So, people weren't quite sure. There was even a belief back in basically the 19th century that if you basically decided to leave civilization and live out, in the wilderness, living off the land, that you would become a hairy animal. Literally, your hair would grow on your body, and you'd look like a monkey. At least to some extent, some people believe that. It sounds like a good way basically to confuse people and witnesses who actually were seeing these entities. So no one can basically separate basically the classic story of the wild men from Sasquatch or the Wendigo, because people weren't exactly sure what they saw. Because the moment you mentioned a hairy humanoid, they basically would say, "Oh, you saw a wild man. You just saw some you just saw some guy who decided to live out in the wilds, kill some animals, wear their furs, and let his hair grow out long." Typical mountain men sort of stories, folks. Either way, these stories were reported by historical newspapers. Theodore Roosevelt himself says that he also saw wild man or one of these Indies. We also have Albert Ostman, John Green, and regional oral traditions. So other people basically also saw these entities, and they became so well known they became part of the local regional traditions and myths. Then we have the phenomena: Sasquatch, abduction claims, aggressive hairy humanoids, wilderness killings, cannibal spirits, and Wendigo traditions. So basically, the various legends of Sasquatch and Wendigo simply combined and basically become more well known because of these stories, folks. I would have to say I do believe that. I can imagine that basically a few Native Americans who basically encountered these creatures started telling basically white settlers, and while they left it off at first, some of these settlers would have these encounters with these hairy entities, and these stories would become more popular and well known. So basically, people would basically become well acquainted with these subjects and with the phenomena behind them, just basically from hearing these legends and basically having an instance, and sometimes even having an incident themselves that basically told them maybe they had been encountered something out of a legend and stuff like that. So there's no doubt that basically these legends and basically these stories that Native Americans and some settlers had been having already. No doubt that basically some of these stories after these particular incidents that basically started showing up in the newspapers, I imagine that basically, these stories basically became more popular, and basically the myths and legends behind them basically were more well known to people who basically decided that they needed some answer to basically understand what they had seen after such an incident, and therefore they'd start talking about it, and basically these legends spread. Indeed, folks, these legends probably basically after these particular sightings and into the 20th and 21st centuries, where people keep having these incidents with these hairy humanoids. These stories of these entities have no doubt basically, have basically stayed around just for the fact that people have basically kept seeing these entities, and they want to basically learn about them. The only way they can really do it, since they don't have a physical body to show off, basically to the naysayers, is basically just learn about the legends that have been told, see how they relate to basically their own sightings, their encounters with these creatures, folks, and therefore the stories keep circulating through the public and stuff like that. Now, let's read this part. Environmental conditions: isolated forest, mountainous terrain, severe winters, limited visibility, and extreme wilderness conditions. So these incidents where basically people were seeing these entities happened at all times of the day, sometimes mostly at dusk or night, but they basically also take place in all manner of weather as well. So it wasn't like people were basically not seeing these things in winter, folks. Like as if basically these Bigfoot would basically hibernate like bears. No, people were seeing them basically in all manner of weather and conditions, and in all times of the year. So yeah, people were seeing them during winter. People were seeing these things up north. Some of these times they were seeing them basically in the Pacific Northwest, and at all times, no matter what weather conditions, people were basically having these experiences. Let's get to the first story, folks, of witness reports. The Sasquatch as kidnapper and killer. Stories of large forest-dwelling humanoids existed long before the term Bigfoot entered popular culture. Early newspaper reports frequently portrayed the Sasquatch not as a shy, elusive animal, but as an aggressive wilderness being capable of stealing food, abducting children, and killing anyone who crossed its path. To some extent, they did do that, folks. Also, because basically, when the newspapers would run these reports, they would basically, they would sensationalize them and stuff like that to make them look, a little more, juicy and, basically a little more out there for the readers to basically read through. So, undoubtedly, some lies were basically probably put in these stories, folks. Now, before we continue, folks, let me go over here. Okay, so we have 28 people watching. That's pretty good. Let's see this. Ooh. We have, 28, 34 watching. Let me go over here as well, folks. I need to do this too. 34 watching. 35 watching. That's pretty good. Let me go over here too, folks. Just a moment. Yeah. Let's get back to the article. Yeah. All right. Here we are. Let me also do this, folks. So my head's a little over here. Or maybe do this. Let's get back to the story now and see where we go. Now, one example of basically one report of basically Bigfoot that appeared in a newspaper, folks, appeared in April 9th, 1934 United States article published in the Fresno Bee. The report announced that before J.F. Blakeney and C.K. Blakeney, medical students from Sacramento, California, were traveling into the mountains near Harrison Lake, British Columbia. Their objectives was extraordinary. They intended to photograph or capture a Sasquatch. The newspaper described the creature as a giant, hairy, unclothed being known through indigenous traditions. According to the article, local people believed that these beings hid in caves and isolated forest clearings emerging near twilight. The creatures were said to approach dwellings near, peer inside and steal food, frighten families, play malicious tricks, abduct children, and occasionally kill warriors. Indeed. Those are some of the legends that basically have been said about folks. But the one particular legend, I should say, folks, basically involves this Native American tribe that was basically more or less, abducted. The whole tribe abducted basically by these three Sasquatch folks and taken and made to basically be slaves while the warriors were away. When the warriors returned, folks, they were able to track their tribesmen down and found that their tribe had basically been enslaved and members of them had been eaten by these Bigfoot. Well, the warriors killed these three Bigfoot. Basically sustained casualties themselves, but were able eventually to free their tribe. It's an old legend, folks, and basically I only gave you a very brief and probably, some of the facts of the story a bit wrong, folks. But there have been stories of Bigfoot basically killing Native American brave warriors for centuries, but not as many as you would think, folks. Even this legend was basically just only one, which was basically very unique, because most stories of Bigfoot, even though legends of basically from Native American lore, only mention that basically these Bigfoot exist, and they were more or less peaceful, like basically a modern version of Bigfoot in popular culture. Either way, I wanted to say that before I continue. Either way, the article here is basically going to say the creatures were said to approach dwellings, peer inside, and steal food and frighten families, play malicious tricks, abduct children, and occasionally kill warriors. Indeed, folks, maybe that old story of these warriors basically having to attack these three Bigfoot is true, or at least, basically, it's not true, but maybe some of the facts behind it are similar to what actually happened, folks. but it is known that basically among more modern UFO and Bigfoot researchers, indeed Bigfoot will prank someone, folks. It is indeed something. The fact that it was mentioned is very interesting. So it looks like maybe Bigfoot, if it does exist, folks, has been basically pranking people for centuries. That's their notion that an actual animal would be able to do that. So maybe it points to the fact that maybe these Bigfoot are more than animals. I don't know. We can't prove it one way or the other, so I guess I can just say that. But let's continue. The Blakeney brothers reportedly carried equipment they hoped would allow them to photograph or even lasso one of the creatures. They also believed that their university anthropology professor would be interested in whatever they discovered. I would have to say, folks, if they actually caught a Bigfoot, then yes. Not that basically some people, like basically nowadays, even if you showed them proof, folks, they might not basically be all that up to them basically being the one who has to prove that Bigfoot exists if they had a physical body. I'm just once more bringing up basically this well-known scientist who seems to hate the notion of UFOs, folks. I can't seem to remember his name. Either way, he basically Tyson wasn't his name, last name. Either way, he doesn't really believe in UFOs, but currently he seems to basically be changing his mind, backtracking on saying that maybe there's something to this. So it makes you think, folks, that basically even well-known scientists who are skeptics, if they're faced with basically if they're either faced with something they can't dispute and basically, what's the word here, folks? Dispute and basically not mothball, but basically debunk. If they're faced with that, as well as maybe even money from the government to basically toe the line, they might change their stance on what they believe. So not exactly good there, folks. That's my view on basically. What was his name? It was Tyson something, or it was basically something Tyson. Either way, let's continue. No. Either way, yeah. Where was I? Yeah. Whether the brothers found anything is unclear. However, the article illustrates how Sasquatch traditions were being reported in mainstream newspapers decades before the famous Bluff Creek footprints popularized the name Bigfoot in 1958. Theodore Roosevelt's deadly wilderness creature. Yeah. Even basically before the term Bigfoot became popular, folks, people basically were talking about these creatures, if only basically for maybe if they were on a board news day, they would talk about it. But that doesn't mean that basically something real wasn't happening. Yeah, and you can see basically even before the popular name that we can't come to basically call these creatures Bigfoot. Yeah, remember, apparently people were basically seeing these indies well before basically the popular name even came into business. Yeah, so there's that. I'm a bit tired as well, folks. Forgive me. But that is the fact. But once again, let's continue. Let's read Theodore Roosevelt's Deadly Wilderness Creature. One of the most disturbing historical accounts involving a possible Sasquatch appeared in Theodore Roosevelt's 1893 book, The Wilderness Hunter. Pardon me, folks. Roosevelt explained that the story had been told to him by a seasoned mountain hunter named Berman. Roosevelt believed that Berman was sincere, knowing that the experienced frontiersmen visibly shuddered while recounting certain portions of the incidents. Berman claimed that the encounter occurred when he was a young man trapping with a companion in the mountains between the Salmon River and the headwaters of the Wisdom River. The two men entered an isolated mountain pass with a sinister reputation. A solitary hunter had reportedly been killed there the previous year. His partially eaten remains had been discovered by prospectors. Does this, say that Bigfoot is actually a cannibalistic monster, folks? Then again, it's considered not human, so I guess, if you can only be considered a cannibal if you're eating your own kind, folks. So if Bigfoot was eating people, it would just basically be predator predation, wouldn't it? Either way, let's once again continue, folks. Now, Either way, Berman claimed that the encounter occurred when he was a young man trapping with a companion in the mountains between the Salmon River and the headwater of the Wisdom River. The two men entered an isolated mountain pass with a sinister reputation. A solitary hunter had reportedly been killed there the previous year. His partially eaten remains had been discovered by prospectors. Berman and his partner nonetheless traveled into the valley and established a camp in a small clearing surrounded by dense forest. When they returned from checking the surrounding area, they discovered that something had entered the camp. Their supplies had been scattered, and the brush shelter had been torn apart. Yeah, that does sound like basically something I've seen from other Bigfoot stories and stuff like that. Usually, you don't see too many stories about basically Bigfoot basically destroying someone's homestead or basically camp, but it appears here, folks. Because in most stories with Bigfoot, you hear basically them attacking people or basically maybe false charging them. If they're basically a party of military commandos or basically, soldiers on basically who are basically trained on the forest for some sort of war game maneuvers, or basically were there to basically, I guess, just plainly be better. Either way, sorry about that, folks. I'm a bit out of it as well. Sorry. Either way, where was I? Yeah. Either way, Berman and his partner, nonetheless traveled into the valley and established a camp in a small clearing surrounded by dense forest, so they weren't going to let the legend of this killer monster, or whatever it was, deter them from staying there. When they returned from checking the surrounding area, they discovered that something had entered the camp, their supplies had been scattered, and their brush shelter had been torn apart. At first, they assumed that it was a bear. That a bear was responsible, but that was far from the truth. Barman's companion examined the tracks more closely by firelight. After following the trail for a short distance, he returned with a disturbing observation. Berman, the bear, has been walking on two legs. Which might actually happen, folks, but doesn't mean that basically was responsible for something like this either. Yes, I know there are basically videos of bears walking on their two legs and doing something like that, folks, and isn't trained, but maybe they had a reason to do what they were doing. I can't seem to concentrate, folks. Either way, let's get back to the article. Maybe I'll basically, clear my head, as well as a swig of soda. Yeah, either way, they basically assumed it was a bear. As I said, folks, bears are known to basically walk on two legs, but their footprints are nothing like a Bigfoot, so there's that. But let's get back to this. Berman's companion examined the tracks more closely by firelight. After following the trail for a short distance, he returned with a disturbing observation. Berman, the bear, has been walking on two legs. The men studied the tracks, but were unable to determine exactly what had been, made them. The impressions appeared to have been left by a creature walking upright, but they did not resemble ordinary human footprints. I imagine they would not. During the night, Berman awoke to a powerful animal odor. He saw the outline of a large body standing near the entrance of their shelter. So, yeah, he smelled this powerful foul odor, folks, which has basically been reported from other people who had similar encounters with these entities, with these Bigfoot. Either way, he grabbed his rifle and fired into the darkness. The creature immediately crashed through the underbrush and disappeared into the forest. The following day, the men returned together as they checked their traps. When they returned to the shelter, the shelter had once been destroyed. Their equipment and bedding had been thrown around the clearing. That night, the men built a large fire and maintained a watch. Good for them, and very intelligent as well, because that's what I would do. Because they didn't want to be caught flat-footed with some unknown animal or predator out in the wilderness. And good for them also setting up a watch. That's what I would also do, folks. Now, around midnight, the creature moved through the forest on the opposite side of the stream. They heard branches snapping as it paced along the hillside and remained there for nearly an hour, periodically producing a harsh, prolonged moan. Although the creature stayed away from the fire, its presence convinced the trappers that they needed to leave. Indeed, I agree with that. The next morning, they began retrieving their traps. Berman eventually was separated from his partner to collect several traps near a beaver pond. His companion returned to camp to prepare their packs. Several hours later, Berman approached the clearing and called out. There was no response. The fire had almost burned out, and the packs had been neatly arranged. Berman then saw his companion's body laying beside a fallen spruce tree. The man was still warm, but his neck had been broken. 4 large fang marks were reportedly visible on his throat. Tracks surrounding the body suggested the unknown creature had attacked the man from behind it, and it had not eaten him. Instead, it appeared to have moved around the corpse and rolled over it before retreating to the forest, which sounds very reminiscent of actual Bigfoot behavior, folks. That people have said that it does. Rolling over bodies, rolling over things, touching and basically feeling things around, trying to determine exactly what it is. Yeah. I do remember quite a few stories like that, folks. Yeah. Either way, yeah, it also sounds very ape-like, the way this creature was basically, after it killed this man, folks, it basically stayed around the body, jumping around, and basically looking at it. That sounds very ape-like behavior to me. But getting back to the article, Berman became convinced that the killer was neither an ordinary animal nor a human being. He believed that it was some form of half-human wilderness monster. That, does basically bring up the fact that, it was a Bigfoot, doesn't it, folks? Now, Roosevelt did not claim to have witnessed the incident himself. He presented it as a story told to him by a frontiersman who appeared to believe every word of it. And maybe he was telling you the truth, folks. Now, let's read the next story. Albert Ostman's Sasquatch abduction. Roosevelt's account describes a possible killing, the Albert Ostman story involves one of the most famous alleged Sasquatch abductions ever recorded. Ostman claimed that the incident occurred in 1924 while he was prospecting near Tobo Inlet, British Columbia. According to Ostman, an indigenous guide transported him into an area and told him about a lost gold mine. Oh, that basically flavors the story, doesn't it, folks? A lost gold mine. I meant, like the Lost Dutchman's gold mine, folks, or some other such thing. Either way, the fact that this Native American indigenous guide basically was bringing Ostman to a said place and bringing up basically the gold mine. I'm not surprised that Bigfoot basically made himself part of the story. Either way, they were now looking for this lost gold mine in this wilderness area. A white prospector had supposedly returned from the mountains several times carrying bags of gold, but one day the man disappeared, sadly. Some local people believed that a Sasquatch had killed him. Ostman had never heard the word Sasquatch, so he asked his guide to explain. The guide reportedly told him, they have hair all over their bodies, but they are not animals. They are people, big people, living in the mountains. Ostman dismissed the warning as an old story. After establishing a wilderness camp, he noticed that something disturbed his supplies during the night. He eventually, climbed into his sleeping bag with a rifle nearby. Ostman claimed that he awoke while being carried away inside his sleeping bag. A large being had allegedly lifted him, his bedding and his equipment, and was transporting him through the darkness. Okay. So it basically stole up on this man and then stole him away without him ever waking up until after he basically, he was already basically beyond help, folks. Right after, folks. Let me take another swig of, sir. Also, let me go over here, folks. We'll see if any more people have joined us. Okay, we have 28. Okay, we have 36, 38, 39, 40, 41. Yeah, 40, 41. Yeah, indeed, folks. 38. 38. 39. 41 people watching, folks. That's good. 42 watching. Thank you. Yeah, 42 people watching the day. That's pretty good. Thank you, folks. Let's get back to this article. Feel free to leave me chats, folks, because I'd love to hear from you. Also, it might wake me up a bit more. Either way, Ostman, who was being carried away by this, entity, folks, this Sasquatch. Either way, he claimed that he awoke while being carried away inside the sleeping bag. A large being had allegedly lifted him, his bedding, and his equipment, and was transporting him through the darkness. He said that he was, carried for several hours before being placed on the grounds in a remote mountain valley. When he emerged from his sleeping bag, Ostman claimed that he found himself surrounded by 4 large, hairy humanoids, and he interpreted them as a family consisting of an adult male, an adult female, and 2 younger individuals. The largest male was described as extremely powerful, broad-shouldered, and approximately 8 feet tall. Ausman believed that the creature was intelligent, communicated with one another. The creatures were intelligent and communicated with each other, and intentionally prevented him from leaving. He claimed that he remained with them for several days. Ausman eventually escaped after giving the large male a quantity of snuff. The creature became ill or disoriented after swallowing it, allowing Ausman to retrieve his rifle and flee through a narrow opening in the valley. Good for him. Do you think they chased him, folks? I would not be surprised, but he doesn't. He's never gone in on word exactly what happened to Ausman after he had poisoned this being. Yeah. Now, he later explained why he had remained silent about the experience here. I did not like to tell them that I had been kidnapped by a Sasquatch. If I had told them, they probably would have said, he is crazy too. I told about my prospecting, but nothing about being kidnapped by a Sasquatch. Smart man. Remember, this is the 19th century, and I would not basically be surprised if you basically claim you saw a Sasquatch. You could have been thrown into an insane asylum, folks. I would not be surprised if that could have happened. Either way, now, Ausman's account was not publicly documented until decades after the alleged event. Investigator John Green later interviewed him extensively, and the story became one of the foundational cases in modern Sasquatch research. It does sound feasible, folks. I'll just say that. Either way, skeptics have questioned the long delay, the absence of physical evidence, and certain geographic details. Supporters argue that Ausman would maintain a consistent account and provided unusual behavioral observations. And provided unusual. Let me read that again, folks. Sorry, my head was out there for a moment. Skeptics have questioned the long delays, the absence of physical evidence, and certain geographic details. Supporters argue that Ausman maintained a consistent account and provided unusual behavioral observations before such details became common in Bigfoot literature, indeed. Yeah, but that doesn't mean I trust his story completely, folks. Remember, this was basically back in the 19th century, where I doubt that basically anyone could have proven anything. But him basically telling about these creatures and the way they had animal-like behavior, but were more intelligent than basically, ordinary beasts, really makes me think that indeed they were telling the truth about it. Indeed. But not really, folks. As I said, I'm on the fence about Ausman and his story for her, folks. I have heard it before. It does sound sincere, but I can't be 100% sure either. Let me stand up so I can clear my head there, folks, because I'm about to fall asleep if I don't. Either way, let's get back to this. I'm sorry about staying up, folks. I know you don't. It's not exactly bad, but it's not the worst thing either. Either way, the fact that Ausman basically claimed these creatures had lived in a family unit, it backs up other stories of people basically seeing entities and these Bigfoot living in family groups. So maybe he really did have something. Well, he did see something and had an encounter with something out in the wilderness. Now, skeptics, we already read that, folks. Yeah. Skeptics, as usual, basically are poo-pooing him because they do so on everybody, folks. But his story is foundational UFO. Yeah, Ausman's story is foundational to Bigfoot research because it brings up some things that other people have said that indeed Bigfoot lives in family groups. They behave like this. They can be curious and stuff like that. So even now, folks, we're basically dealing with this story of what Ausman saw, even to this very day. The truth remains uncertain. Let's read, about basically Bigfoot and whether or not Austin was really telling the truth. But his story does have some interesting details that basically now are talked about. Let's get to the next story, folks. The Wendigo, a different kind of wilderness terror. The Wendigo is frequently grouped, with Bigfoot and other hairy humanoids, but the traditional concept is considerably different indeed. Because while Wendigo can be a big hairy humanoid itself, folks, usually it basically is known as an evil entity that just kills and eats people. Yeah, because those Wendigo traditions are primarily associated with several Algonquin-speaking peoples, including the Ojibwe, the Cree, the Saltrux, the Nescapi, and the Innu. Spellings and pronunciations, were vary, including Wendigo, Wendigo, Witigo, with Crow, and Witigo. Yeah, or even or even other names as well, folks. Yeah, like the Wendigo as well, folks. Don't forget that name too. Now, in many traditions, the Wendigo is not simply an undiscovered animal. It is a dangerous spiritual condition, a cannibalistic being, or a malevolent force connected with insatiable hunger, selfishness, isolation, winter, and starvation. Because a lot of these accounts of Bigfoot take place in basically winter. Well, a lot of these accounts of Wendigo take place during winter, folks. I said Bigfoot instead of basically Wendigo. Indeed, folks, some people think that basically due to the fact that these stories seem to crop up more often in winter, it's due to the fact that basically in winter, folks, maybe basically basically the modern world basically took the wildness out of man, or at least attempts to, folks. That back then, folks, people would basically hide cannibalistic behavior because while they were starving, and sometimes they'd end up eating basically maybe one of their neighbors or even maybe one of their family members, especially if they died of natural causes because it was middle of winter, folks. And that's not such an uncommon thing to happen to people back before we basically had modern medicine. So maybe some of these accounts of Wendigos, folks, are people going mad or basically trying to cover up an actual incident of cannibalism because they don't want to basically commit it and they have to pay their consequences for it. But let's continue. That's why basically, Wendigo is often associated with winter, folks, because it's a time of dying and misery. So undoubtedly stories of basically these spiritual entities basically tempting man to basically become a cannibal because him and his family are starving is no doubt no doubt something that can basically be seen as a real true thing that happened. But remember, so basically this is only basically various people try to basically make excuses for basically becoming cannibals, folks. Not that basically that Wendigo is real. He could be real, folks, but I just can't be 100% sure. A lot of these stories sound out there, and maybe they were only made because people who basically made them are trying to basically make an excuse for the cannibalism that took place, perhaps, on their land. Either way, that's that, folks. Now, let's get back to this account. Now, where was I? Some accounts describe a human who becomes transformed after committing cannibalism. Others portray the Wendigo as a possessing spirit that drives its victims toward violence and the consumption of human flesh. Indeed, those are stories I've heard as well. Descriptions differ widely between communities and storytellers. The being may appear enormous and powerful, or impossibly thin and emaciated. Some traditions describe a skeletal body, damaged skin, and foul odor, unnatural eyes, or a heat made of ice. Yeah. All right. Either way, folks, there's even basically was until this video game called Until Dawn, in which basically the monsters in the game were Wendigos, but they were like these skeletal, almost zombie-like beings. But they were very reminiscent of some legends of Sasquatches as well. So maybe there's some truth to it. Because it inspired the legends that basically inspired this video game. Let me stand up again, folks, okay? Now, let's get here, folks. Now, descriptions differ widely between communities and storytellers. The being may appear enormous and powerful or impossibly thin and emaciated. Some traditions describe a skeletal body, damaged skin, foul odor, unnatural eyes, or a heart made of ice, which you have to remember, folks, is that basically like a vampire. Destroying the heart of a Wendigo is the only way to kill it, really. But their hearts are made of ice, and the way to kill them is basically, well, burning the heart, or basically using like something like a heated knife to kill, or, well, basically cut the heart out of the body and then burn it and stuff like that. Sometimes using a burning instrument as well can do it, like a burning stake, or basically a burning piece of metal. After cutting the heart out, and then basically using the burning metal to basically, well, burn it and cut it into pieces, killing the Wendigo. So you get the idea. At least I've heard about that, folks. Something similar to that. Anyway, the creature's hunger can never be satisfied. Each time it eats, it grows larger, showing that it remains perpetually starving. The familiar modern image of an antlered forest monster is largely a product of later artwork, films, games, and popular horror. Antlers are now a universal feature of the older Algonquin traditions. Indeed, folks, in those traditions, they basically look and sound more like Bigfoot. Sometimes maybe they describe it basically being a large naked humanoid, or basically being maybe, I guess, like if Bigfoot got maybe mange and basically its fur fell out. You get the idea. But they do mention that basically Bigfoot are large, basically, well, large, well, almost superhumanly large entities that basically humans. That's what you see in some of these Algonquin traditions and tales and mythology. But let's get back to the article again. Some northern stories describe the being as, well, so thin that it could nearly disappear when viewed from the side. Other accounts associated with it, people vanishing from the forest during periods of hunger or severe winter weather. Indeed, folks. As I said earlier, the Wendigo and the stories behind it are associated with winter, and particularly because of the harsh conditions, people would starve and would blame the maybe cannibalizing basically dead people, basically maybe some of their family members or neighbors who had died, and the communities would blame the disappearance or, well, I guess death on Wendigos. But really it was just people basically being pushed so far that the only food they had left was each other. Yeah, but these accounts did tend to happen during winter, folks, so that is something I basically must reiterate. Now, these traditions served purposes far beyond entertainment. They warned against cannibalism, greed, selfishness, hoarding, and the abandonment of communal responsibility during times of, scarcity. Indeed, folks. Yeah, but if you're starving and your family and the community is starving, folks, then, well, basically resulting in cannibalism might look like a pretty good way, basically, to survive. But it's also clear, folks, that afterwards people would feel guilty about it, and then they basically make up the story that what happened was that basically cannibals killed our neighbor, killed our family member, or basically cannibalized their bodies after they died of natural causes. That's what happened, and this is what these people would basically in small towns would stick to. Either way, folks, let's read the actual, story of basically apparently of a man encountering a Wendigo. Jack Fiddler, the Wendigo hunter. One of the most controversial historical figures associated with, Wendigo belief was Jack Fiddler, an Anishinaabe spiritual leader from the region now known as northwestern Ontario. Fiddler was said to be able to identify and defeat Wendigos. He had reportedly claimed responsibility for destroying several such beings during his lifetime. To outsiders, these events were murders. Within Fiddler's spiritual and cultural understanding, however, some of the victims were believed to have become possessed or to have reached the point where they would transform into cannibalistic threats. Or, in reality, folks, they were crazy people or people who had mental illnesses, and this man killed them. You can blame a lot of such things, a lot of bad behavior from people from one thing, like basically them being odd or basically being off, then being killed for it because people thought they were witches, fae, or even Wendigos in this case, folks, or basically these people just murdering people and just getting away with it by coming up with some lame legend or using a legend to basically say, no, it was right for me to kill this man. He was a monster, so he had to die. You can see it from both ways. Well, both ways people view it, folks. But let's continue once again. In 1906, Canadian authorities arrested Jack Fiddler and his brother Joseph following the death of a woman whom they believed was becoming a Wendigo. The case represented more than a criminal prosecution. It also reflected a direct confrontation between Canadian law and the spiritual practices and legal traditions of an indigenous community that had remained largely beyond colonial government control. Well, maybe this control needed to happen, folks, because basically these people were killing each other because they were letting hysteria basically control them and stuff like that. I'll say that. Either way, Fiddler did not survive to stand trial. He escaped custody and died in 1907. Joseph was later convicted, sentenced to death, and ultimately had his sentence reduced. The Fiddler case is somewhat presented as proof that Wendigos were considered real. It more accurately demonstrates that Wendigo belief could carry profound spiritual, psychological, and legal consequences. Indeed, folks. And remember, these men might have actually just murdered people and thought they were going to turn to Wendigos. Remember, hysteria can lead to very bad things as well. Yeah, so you shouldn't do things like basically, just believe that someone's becoming a monster, basically drive you to kill someone because you think you're basically fighting something like Dracula, folks, or a Wendigo in this case, as I said earlier. Other indigenous wilderness beings. Let's read this part now, folks. Numerous indigenous nations have traditions involving powerful beings that inhabit forests, mountains, and isolated regions. However, these traditions should not automatically be treated as alternate names for Bigfoot. I can see that as well. The details, meanings, and cultural roles vary significantly. Some Pacific Northwest traditions describe large, hairy, human-like beings capable of abducting people. Certain stories tell of wilderness beings that steal food, carry away women or children, kill travelers, or inhabit holes and shelters in the earth. Indeed, some of these stories even basically involve creatures that look very much like basically the Fae from basically from Ireland and basically European beliefs, folks. So yeah, people have been seeing little people as well apparently in North America. Either way, yeah. Other beings function as spiritual guardians, cautionary figures, transformed humans, cannibal giants, or embodiments of dangerous places. Names that have appeared in older English language cryptozoological writings include the Sayatko, I guess, the Oma, the Tanako, and the Quolin Mi. These labels have often been repeated without adequate attention to language, tribal distinctions, or the original cultural context. I can see that as well, folks, because maybe basically these creatures became famous and spread around through mythology, but basically some of the details of what they actually mean to basically the tribes who basically first popularized them, maybe they were lost and stuff like that. And forgive me as well, folks, for probably mispronouncing and butchering their names. I'm doing my best. But let's continue. Because oral traditions can be altered. Yeah, because oral traditions can be, damn it, what? Let me get back here, folks. Here we are. Because oral traditions can be altered when recorded by outsiders, researchers should avoid assuming that every hairy giant, cannibal spirit, or forest-dwelling humanoid represents the same phenomena. Indeed. Commentary. Let's read this now, folks. These accounts reveal an important difference between the popular image of Bigfoot and the beings described in some historical traditions. Modern Bigfoot reports often involve a creature that avoids humans, retreats when observed, and displays defensive rather than predatory behavior. The older stories presented here include deliberate intimidation, camp destruction, stalking, kidnapping, physical attack, and death. Indeed, there does seem to be some difference, folks. Remember, these were stories told by basically tribesmen or basically people who were basically telling their stories to basically some newspapers. And sometimes over the years, folks, these stories would basically be inflated or basically details of them would be altered, making these Bigfoot basically, instead of basically having them basically be some sort of physical, flesh and blood animal, folks. Instead, you get these cannibalistic monsters instead. Yeah. Instead of it being an animal, it's actually just a monster. That's something in reality that's just people just make up details to these stories. Now, Theodore Roosevelt's Berman narrative contains several details that remain familiar in contemporary Sasquatch reports. These include a powerful animal odor, which people have basically said, indeed, Bigfoot smells really bad, folks. There's also bipedal tracks, nighttime activity, repeated destruction of a campsite, pacing outside the light of a fire, prolonged vocalizations, apparent stalking behavior, and unusual strength. None of these characteristics prove that Berman encountered a Sasquatch, a bear, a human, a human attacker, an embellished frontier story. Yeah. Yeah, an embellished frontier story or a combination of fear and misinterpretation could explain portions of the narrative. The reported broken neck and fang marks also complicate attempts to identify the attacker as a conventional Bigfoot. Because yeah, this is the first time I've heard of such a thing as well, folks. Usually in Bigfoot attacks, it's a Bigfoot. He's a breaks someone's basically rips someone's head off, literally, folks. The one story I basically know of Bigfoot actually killing someone is the Bigfoot basically actually ripping someone's head off. In most stories, Bigfoot basically lets people go away scot free, even if the person shoots them and stuff like that. Yeah, either way, let's see. Yeah. Now, let's move on to the next part. The Albert Ostman account differs because the alleged beings did not kill or seriously injure him. If his story is accepted, the incident suggests intentional abduction, okay, rather than predation. The creatures behaved as a social group and appeared capable of planning, communicating, showing curiosity, and exercising territorial control. Yeah, territorial control, folks. Indeed, folks, the Bigfoots acted as a family unit. Now I've heard of variants of the story as well, folks, that there was more than basically just four Bigfoot. There was a fifth that was an basically old man like Bigfoot, or say it was looked visibly older than the other Bigfoot, and basically was an elder or something. So maybe there was more to the story than we really know, and their behavior is if it is true, folks, is very human-like, isn't it? But yeah, they appear to basically exert some sort of territorial control, basically trying to control Albert Ostman and make sure he doesn't leave. So yeah, it seemed like they were trying to basically control him, almost as if they want to make him a pet or something. But that's just me, folks. Once again, let's move on. However, Ostman waited decades before publicly describing the event, and no physical evidence was recovered. His account remains historically important, but unverified. Yeah, it's unverified, folks, but I can understand why he would basically hide it, because probably he was worried he'd be he'd be ridiculed or maybe even be thrown into an insane asylum or something. I can believe that. Now, let's move on. Once again, folks, the Wendigo should not be interpreted as merely an indigenous word for Bigfoot. In many Algonquin traditions, it represents uncontrollable appetite, cannibalism, social isolation, greed, spiritual corruption, and the mortal dangers of winter famine, indeed. There may occasionally be descriptive overlap. Both Sasquatch and Wendigo narratives can involve remote forests, enormous humanoid forms, foul odors, missing people, fear, predatory behavior, and avoidance of civilized areas. That overlap does not establish that they are the same entity, indeed. Researchers should also recognize that early newspaper writers frequently sensationalized indigenous beliefs. Indeed, folks, I've said that before, that basically some of these stories were basically sensationalized to make them a little juicier. So always remember that too when looking at these old stories of basically newspapers, and basically because you can look at it like this, folks. Even now in the modern world, journalists sensationalize stories and basically paint these stories in a way that basically can help their political narrative, or basically make the stories far more juicier to any common man watching the show at the time, or basically reading about it in a newspaper. So yeah, I always remember these 19th century reports, folks. There's a good chance they were either made up or basically sensationalized to the point that they may as well be made up, folks, even if there is a kernel of truth somewhere somewhere in the story, at least. Yeah, researchers should also recognize that early newspaper writers frequently sensationalized indigenous beliefs. Terms such as bogeyman, monster, and a baby snatcher reflected the language and prejudices of the period, and not necessarily the full meaning of the original traditions. Indeed, I agree with that. Still, the recurrence of kidnappings and man-killing themes cannot be ignored. Similar warnings appear across widely separated wilderness and cultural, a bit widely separated wilderness, cultures, and historical periods. Yeah, you see these kinds of stories all over the world, folks. Yeah. The stories may represent dangerous wildlife encounters, human violence, survival taboos, cautionary folklore, spiritual beliefs, or memories of encounters with an unidentified humanoid population. Perhaps they contain elements of several explanations. Yeah, that's another thing I can agree with. Now, case notes. The April 9th, 1934 newspaper account described an expedition in the Harrison Lake region to photograph or capture a Sasquatch. Early Sasquatch stories, sometimes portrayed the beings as child abductors, thieves, tricksters, and killers. You see that with basically a lot of stories, folks, and basically, a lot of the ways that these newspapers could basically make these Bigfoot stories basically be more evil or business sensationalized was saying that they would kidnap and eat people and even children, folks. Now, Theodore Roosevelt published the Berman story in the Wilderness Hunter in 1893. Roosevelt did not witness the event. He recorded the account as Berman told to him. The Berman creature reportedly walked on two legs, emitted a strong odor, destroyed the camp, produced prolonged vocalizations, and killed a trapper. Albert Ostman claimed that a Sasquatch carried him away in his sleeping bag near Toba Inlet, British Columbia, in 1924. Osman said that he was held for several days by a group of four hairy humanoids. Osman's account was made public decades after the alleged incidents and remains unverified. Wendigo traditions originate within several Algonquin-speaking cultures and should not be reduced to conventional Bigfoot lore. Indeed, that's another thing I agree with. Bigfoot and Wendigos, they might have some key traits that overlap, but they're definitely different entities. So always remember that too. Now, let's see here, folks. Either way, Wendigo beliefs commonly involve cannibalism, winter, famine, insatiable hunger, greed, spiritual corruption, and social isolation. Indeed. The antlered Wendigo, common in modern entertainment, is not a consistent feature of traditional accounts. Indeed, folks, because old stories of Wendigos make them look either like hairless humans, almost like basically pale crawlers, sometimes even basically no more bigger than a human, or basically like a zombie or a zombie of basically traditional regular human size. But also basically if they are sometimes these old legends, when they describe them as being inhuman, they look more like basically like Bigfoot, but maybe a bit different as well. Just that they're large, hairy, or basically large humanoids at least, folks, or like giants. But different from Bigfoot as well. But antlers, that's something that was put into this, that was basically popularized later on into the 21st century, folks. Either way, so I want you to basically remember that fact too. Now, Jack Fiddler was an Anishinaabe spiritual leader whose actions against people believed to be becoming Wendigos resulted in intervention by Canadian authorities because he ended up murdering people, folks. And most likely these people had mental conditions, and he basically thought they would transform into monsters, so he had to kill them. Now, similarities between Sasquatch and Wendigo stories may reflect shared wilderness fears, cultural exchanges, misunderstood animal encounters, indeed, or different interpretations of unexplained humanoid phenomena. Indeed, I agree with those points as well, folks. No conclusive physical evidence currently connects the historical kidnappings and killing stories to a verified unknown species. Indeed, folks, these are just stories. They don't prove that these creatures exist, but the fact that basically there might be something out there, that's startling. Now, let's read on. Readers interested in similar cases can explore the Famous Monsters archive for additional reports of aggressive Sasquatch encounters, Bigfoot abduction claims, unexplained wilderness disappearances, cannibal giants, Wendigo traditions, forest humanoids, and so on. Terrifying encounters are reported by hunters, campers, and trappers, and indigenous witnesses throughout North America. Let's read the source notes, folks. The original materials supplied for the report included a 1934 newspaper account that the Theodore Roosevelt Berman narrative, Albert Ostman's testimony, and collected Wendigo and indigenous wilderness being traditions. Good. Now, before I continue, folks, let me take a blur. Oh, yeah, we have good. Okay, we had 26 people watching. We have 30 people watching, folks. We have 40 watching. Okay, we have 41 watching. Okay, we have 40, we have, indeed, we have, 41, 44, 45 watching, folks. Not bad. Once again, thank you, folks. And let me make sure about this. I want to make sure my face isn't too much in the way. Let's get back to this article. Let's read the source notes. The original material provided, we already read that, folks, yeah. The Berman narrative appears in Theodore Roosevelt's The Wilderness Hunter and was also reproduced in Hunting the Grizzly and other sketches. Roosevelt explicitly introduced it as a goblin story told to him by the frontiersman Brumman rather than as an event Roosevelt personally witnessed. Indeed, folks, basically it's a story he was told. He didn't actually basically experience it at all. He just believed that it did indeed happen. At least to some degree, folks. Maybe it was a common animal, or maybe it was some lunatic on the wilderness, folks. But none, maybe, folks. Either way, no. Well, yeah. You get the idea with the Berman story, folks. It was maybe some unknown, maybe Berman here went nuts, and and or maybe had temporary, basically temporary insanity or something, and hallucinated all of it. But indeed, Berman basically Theodore Roosevelt believed Berman was telling the truth at the very least. Research concerning John Green confirms that he conducted extensive interviews with Albert Ostman regarding the alleged 1924 abduction. Wendigo beliefs are associated with several Algonquin-speaking peoples and vary considerably between communities. The common element includes cannibalism, uncontrolled hunger, winter famine, and spiritual or moral corruption. The concept should not be treated as a generic indigenous name for Bigfoot. Indeed, folks, once again, I have to stress that point. Bigfoot and Wendigos are not the same entities. Now, the historical record concerning Jack Fiddler identifies him as an Anasabi chief and spiritual leader whose arrest followed the killing of a woman believed by members of his community to be becoming a Wendigo. The case also marked a major confrontation between Canadian authority and their traditional laws and spiritual beliefs of Fiddler's people. Good. Here we now have the fact, folks. Let's read this too. Is the Wendigo another name for Sasquatch? Generally, no. Sasquatch is usually described as a physical, hairy humanoid, while the Wendigo is commonly understood within Algonquin traditions as a cannibalistic being, a transformed person, or an embodiment of uncontrolled hunger and greed. Did Theodore Roosevelt claim to see a Bigfoot? No, Roosevelt recorded a frightening story that mountain hunter named Berman told him. Later, researchers interpreted the unknown creature in the story as a possible Sasquatch. I agree as well. Was Albert Ostman really kidnapped by Sasquatch? Ostman claimed that he was abducted in 1924 and held by 4 Sasquatch-like beings. His testimony is historically significant, but the event was never independently verified. Were Sasquatch traditionally considered dangerous? Some traditions describe dangerous territorial or predatory beings capable of kidnapping and killing humans. Other traditions portray first giants as reclusive, spiritually powerful, protective, or largely indifferent to people. Why are Wendigo and stories associated with winter? Many traditions developed in northern environments, where prolonged cold, isolation, food scarcity, and starvation posed genuine threats. The Wendigo embody the dangers of cannibalism, selfishness, hoarding, and abandoning communal responsibility during a crisis. Indeed, I agree. That's another point I agree with. Either way, fascinating article, but we're at the end. Either way, folks, we have, 30, 41 people watching, 42, 43, 44 people watching, 45 people watching. Thank you for making this a great live stream, folks, but we're now at the end. But either way, folks, that really was startling. Do you think that basically Bigfoot exists? Do you think that they have some relationship with the Wendigo? That maybe people saw Bigfoot and they basically maybe ancient people or old people basically hundreds of years ago saw Bigfoot, and then basically the story of them spread. Maybe sometimes Bigfoot could basically become a cannibal itself, folks, and maybe this is what led to the stories of Wendigo. But in reality, folks, we don't know what happens if these entities do exist and they have to live through winter. Maybe they do basically eat each other as well as people to survive. But then again, maybe this led to the notion and legend of the Wendigo. But as I said, folks, we just don't know 100% for sure. We don't know if Bigfoot's actually intelligent or not, or if it's just an animal. All we know is that basically we do believe that some people believe it's real. Either way, we're now at the end, folks. So please go subscribe to my YouTube channel, Read Comics They're Bad For You. The there's misspelled. It's THERE. It's Read Comics They're Bad For You. It's supposed to be Read Comics They're Bad For You, but I misspelled the title as there, just a regular there. So use the links and go subscribe to me up on YouTube and on BitChute, folks, as well as basically subscribe to my YouTube channel with the links down below or in the descriptions. Sorry, my mind just I'm tired here, folks, so forgive me. Either way, folks, please go over and subscribe to Dark Saints on YouTube and on BitChute. Then go subscribe to Robot Co-op on YouTube and on Twitch. Then go subscribe to Stitched Together Picks Up on YouTube. Okay. Now remember, down in the descriptions or in the chat, I'll have links. I'll have links to YouTube, Twitter, Rumble, Odyssey, Twitch or BitChute, Dark Saints, Robot Co-op, and Stitched Together Picks. Okay. Remember, if I do upload videos today, folks, one video will be up on YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, Twitch, or BitChute, and the other video will be exclusive to Rumble, Odyssey, Twitch, or BitChute, okay? That is if I do upload today, folks. I will get back to uploading my videos in a normal manner as soon as possible. So forgive me if I don't upload any today. Plus, I'm kind of tired. Either way, folks, just look for these videos if I do upload them. Now, remember as well, folks, I'm going to unlist this live stream up on YouTube. So remember, you can keep watching this live stream, but remember, once it's unlisted, if you click off of it, you probably won't be able to get back onto it. So, but remember, this live stream is up on Rumble, Odyssey, Twitch, and BitChute as well. So use those links and go subscribe to me and watch all my videos, all my content that I basically put on those sites. They're up there 24/7. So you should also all know that. Now, remember as well, folks, go to Indiegogo and check out my pre-launch page to my comic book Scumdogs. The name of my campaign is Scumdogs Second Chance Campaign. Yeah, go out and basically check it out and sign up for it, folks. In a few months, I'll actually launch the real campaign so more people can back my book and read it. Either way, folks, go to Indiegogo one last time and check out my campaign, Scumdogs Second Chance Campaign, and sign up for it. Either way, folks, I'm Chris Williams from the Scumdogs Kennel. Thank you all for joining me. I'll be back again tomorrow with another great, live stream, followed by hopefully 2 more great videos. Until then, as usual, folks, I'll see you all again soon. So until tomorrow, thank you for joining me, and I'll see you again there and then. Okay, folks? So bye. Either way, folks, good stream.